So thank you, everybody. Happy International Women's Day. So today's our last talk of the day with the I Love Me campaign. This morning we had Danielle Robert, who was speaking from Ottawa, and she was talking about choosing to challenge our self-worth. And we had Jane Coos earlier this evening speaking about practicing self-compassion during the pandemic. And so both talks are available to be viewed now on the event page. And if you miss those videos, you can take a look at them, and they'll also be up eventually on the ILM campaign's new YouTube channel. So I'm your moderator today. I'm Cassandra Petrella, and I'm a registered psychotherapist. And I am talking to you here from my mental health clinic in Ottawa, Ontario at Senta Counseling Services. So I'm a therapist that provides treatment to teens, adults, couples, and families. And I do a lot of work, especially with young teen girls. And that's how the sort of origination of this campaign began. It was through a lot of the work that I was doing with teen girls in practice and recognizing that there was something going on here that we're really missing. There's a gap in the educational program and in community settings where girls are really just not taught about mental health coping, about self-love and self-esteem from a young age. And so that really originated 5 years ago, our campaign's mission to provide free mental health education to teen girls in school-based settings and community settings in order to help them grow to become strong, empowered women. And over the last 5 years, our campaign has evolved greatly to include young adult women and adult women as well in the work that we do. And we've grown across Canada. We have core teams in St. John's, Newfoundland and Ottawa, Ontario, and we've got members all across, all across Canada. And so it's been really beautiful for us to reflect on our 5-year anniversary today, because it's allowed us to see, and really feel good about these connections that we made with thousands of women and girls throughout the past 5 years, and to really be proud of the efforts that other people have joined in, whether they're community members, volunteers, professionals in the community in mental health or educational settings, family members of volunteers who help us with our fundraising efforts to ensure that everything is offered free of cost to participants. And so we're celebrating our 5-year anniversary, and we are excited that you're here for our last talk of the day with Char San Pedro. And so just a couple of things I want to mention. We are going to be recording the session, as I mentioned earlier. And so if you have any concerns about anonymity as we're recording online, please feel free to change your name, put an alias in if there's anything like that that you need to do. And please help us in creating a safe and inclusive space this evening. That's important to us. We also want to mention that we are a campaign that really provides mental health education to girls and women. And that's because our professional background is within that setting. But we also want to say that we believe that it's really important to consider boys and men's mental health as well, and to have them be included in the conversation, because we're, all coming together as humans to create change today on Women's Day, and boys and men are a huge important part of that conversation. So today's talk is primarily focused on women's mental health, but we want it to feel inclusive, and anyone else is welcome to join in the conversation. And we also want to acknowledge the Indigenous land that today's talk is being presented upon. That's our talk here coming from Ottawa, where Char is in Toronto, and fully across Canada, where all of you are residing in. So we want to say, that we acknowledge that we are here in peace and togetherness, and we are grateful for that land that, was here by Indigenous people before we arrived to Canada or our families did. And so coming into our panel discussion now with Char. So Char is going to be joining us, and we're going to be talking about this year's theme, Choose to Challenge, and talking a lot about the self-love experience of women, and also what that means in a community setting, and really touching on this year's theme of choosing to challenge gender norms and speaking up for gender equality. So before we get into our talk, I'll just introduce Char and tell you a little bit about her background as I share with you her biography. So Char San Pedro is a feminist, friend, humanitarian, social entrepreneur, intersectional gender equality advocate, community builder, orator, and writer. She is the founder of the Good to Be Good Foundation, a grassroots nonprofit community-based humanitarian and advocacy organization serving diverse, underserved, and marginalized women, girls, and their communities, while actively advocating for gender equality, social justice, and total equity. Good to Be Good's community-facing, cause-driven events and ongoing campaigns raise critical funds that support social services and programs and local charitable investments. A voracious entrepreneur with a background in modeling and a self-avowed polymath, Char is also the creative producer of 920 Films and a music manager at an independent label. Her media work has been featured in various publications such as HuffPost, Bell Media, Flair Magazine, Time Magazine, CTV, Global News, Vogue Italia, and over the years, she's collaborated with major local brands, including Pagaya, Cane's Lions, Sony, the Drake Hotel, Healthy Planet, and Farfetch. Always a writer at heart, she often pens think pieces on subjects of feminism, ecological sustainability, human rights, interconnectedness, and spiritual and social welfare on her website and online channels. Char lives in Toronto, where she volunteers and consults with charities and nonprofits. She also serves on the board of directors of Youth Rising Above, a charitable organization whose mission is to help transform the lives of marginalized youth and young people through engaging and dynamic programming opportunities. All right, Char, so we are very happy to have you with us. So of course, I want to welcome you again to the chat.
I should have given you a smaller bio.
Well, I think it's great that everyone gets to hear about the incredible work that you're doing. You're an inspiring woman.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually just preferred when people ask me, like, what do you do? Like, the first thing I always say is, oh, I'm just a friend, right? Because yeah, you know, at the heart of it, we like to attach ourselves to different labels and the things that we do, but at the heart of it, we are just human beings. But yeah, and then we just
coming together.
Yeah, we sort of avoid the whole, like, here's my resume kind of speak. So, but thank you for that. I appreciate that.
That's beautiful. I like that too.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't you then just tell us a little bit more about the work that you are doing with the Good to Be Good Foundation. So tell us a bit more about how you kind of spend your time day to day in that supportive kind of relationship with women as a friend, as you say.
Yeah, so I am the founder of a grassroots nonprofit called Good to Be Good, to what you were saying, and it's been around for about 4 years. We really work at the intersections of advocacy, humanitarian, and mutual aid, and gender equality. So our mission is a bit twofold. We provide restorative and empowering support to diverse women, non-binary folks, and their communities who either have experienced gender-based violence, marginalization, and systemic challenges. But the other side of that is we also raise awareness for these social issues that plague our communities today. And we really advocate for a kinder and more equitable society as a whole. So, you know, we're primarily and chiefly women-led and very much volunteer-powered. And yeah, we've been around for quite some time, but we still have a lot of work to do. And a big chunk of what we do is really believing in that if for any efficacious, lasting, all-encompassing impact to really take flight, we really push for our dependency on a mind that demands priority for the most at-risk and disempowered voices. So that's where we're at right now.
Absolutely. What do you see in the work that you're doing in terms of the self-love experiences and mental health for women today? And when I say today, I kind of mean within the climate of the pandemic.
Sorry, you cut out there for a second.
Sorry. Can you hear me okay, Char?
I can, yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about, in your interactions with women today, a bit more about the self-love experience that you kind of recognize in them and the state of their mental health. Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, no, totally. It's such a personally moving and important question to ask, because I think we can all say that we know or have known someone who struggled with their capacity to really view themselves worthy of their own love. You know, there's been this great mega chunky, okay, I know that's not a word, but mega chunky big lie that Western culture and modern society have perpetuated upon us as women, especially to young girls, that a woman herself is not deserving of her own compassion and protection. You know, and this type of messaging is really presented to her in so many ways, in the media, at home, school, social groups, and a workplace. And she also really gets them on, she also really receives them early on in her life, that basically a woman's grace and nourishment should only be exercised for the sake of others. And she's only expected to nurture and help people, thus often sacrificing her own well-being along the way. You know, while these are beautiful instincts that naturally come to women and girls, I feel that these traits get abused instead of appreciated. And this consequently leaves a woman in a space where they may feel like they have nothing left to give because they've given it all. They've been encouraged to give everything that they have, leaving them with nothing to even give for themselves. So, I've been through similar feelings, and I know so many girlfriends who have too. And what can happen from there is that they suffer in silence, or they live too long in a shame storm of not being good enough, believing that their worth is something that they have to earn, or even feeling ashamed that they feel that way in the first place. And that lack of love that a woman can develop toward herself really can be tied to overarching gender constructs and adverse biases. This is not something that she just comes up with. She doesn't just say, hey, you know what, I'm not going to love myself today. These are all examples of a much larger systemic issue that affects us individually, right? For example, reaching out for help is considered a cry for attention, or a woman extending love and confidence to herself is considered selfish or wrong. And we really have to be mindful about this and hopefully challenge its accuracy.
Absolutely. What was it like for you, Char, growing up in your own experience as we think back to how our journey of self-love really evolves from being a girl to being a teen to being a woman? It's almost like we have all of these separate lives of who we actually are as women.
Yeah. I mean, I was an emotional girl, and I was an emotional teenager. What teenager isn't? And I don't say emotional in vain or to simply imply negative connotations. Like, I mean emotional as in we're learning to open ourselves up to these big soaring questions about life, really listening to what it's landing in our body, and not understanding what it means at the time. And for me, mostly fluctuating in my teens between reacting and transcending. So, it's not said enough that being a girl or a teenager is really hard, especially as we're coming into our very own. And, I mentioned that as early as childhood, we're constantly bombarded by cultural messaging on how to be, who to love, what to desire, how to act or not act, what to accept. And, as a young adult, those messages, at least for me, were mentally amplified and felt very jarring to receive. And they impede any sense of self I was still learning. So, I didn't enjoy my teenage years, particularly because my home environment was very precarious and very abusive. And I wanted so badly to be an adult because I felt that only then would I know my place in the world. And if I turn into an adult, only then would I be able to really articulate my sense of power. So, like most young adolescents, I had this sense of urgency about what was possible, and really stubbornly believed that finding love was the only way I could really stop the aching, right? And then just to that extent about self-love and self-journey growing up, I was told that love was something you gave or something you received. And that notion never really felt true to me, even as a kid. I grew up not knowing my father, and my mother was very abusive. So this idea of love being contingent on reciprocity or conditional on the other person being lovable never really sat well with me. And it didn't really apply to me. So when I was 15, I ran away from the hostile environment that I was told was home. And I hung on to that sense of urgency about what was possible, and then realized later on, oh, love at the core is not something acquired or afforded. It is exactly who we are. Love is self-love, community love, love in general. It is this meeting between inherence and horizon. And, meeting that truth really shaped my relationship with others and myself. So sometimes I feel like that 15-year-old girl, but only this time I don't have to worry so much about puberty.
But Char, it's a vulnerable time, and it sounds like for you, it was a vulnerable time that was even more heightened by the circumstances that you were experiencing.
Yes.
And it goes to say, what happens to girls when they don't love themselves from a young age. But then, we also add to that a situation such as you described, to actually having to leave the home,
Yeah.
that, that's a recipe for an uphill battle as a young girl, to then
Yeah.
find myself as a woman when I'm in a vulnerable place. And one of the ways that we're also in that vulnerable place is like, because we're so open to trying to figure out who we are, and we're on this, this really cognitive, like from a neuroscience perspective, your brain is evolving so rapidly as a teen, because
Right.
it's really shaping and trying to attach to who you are uniquely away from the family.
Yeah.
You are so impressionable. And if you get hit with things that aren't good at
Mhm.
that really impressionable time, you then have to move through life as a woman, and then find a way at some point, hopefully in your life, to
Mhm.
do the undoing of all of that. And, and,
Exactly.
and, and that occurs through these types of conversations and participating in these kind of growth experiences together.
Yeah. I also just want to say that, we talk about the hardships of being a teenager and that self journey, that self journey towards self love. But we also don't talk about the fact that we we can have it, right? We always talk
Mhm,
about, oh, self-love is like a never-ending journey, but no, it's actually available to us. And we
mhm,
have to really frame women and girls to being resilient within their own skin, that yes, we have these barriers and we have these
mhm,
obstacles that are much different than what boys and men face, but
mhm,
we can overcome them. We won't be ruined by them. And I think that's
mhm.
really important to talk about as well.
It is that capacity to grow.
Yeah.
What do you think that, like, how do we nourish that capacity to grow in your opinion? So as you speak to the women who are joining us today, um, maybe it's something from your experience that helped you grow in that way, or maybe it's something that through the work that you do, that you try to really instill in terms of that resiliency for girls. Can you talk to that a little bit?
I mean, it's like it is a never ending journey, and you can find it in different places for sure. But for me, what's really helped bolster my self-esteem and bolster my sense of love for myself is understanding that I am equal, I am special, I am deserving of belonging like
Mhm,
everyone else, right? When we sort of neutralize everybody, not in a neutralize in a
mhm,
bad way, but when we
mhm,
when we try to humanize people, and we can also sort of humanize ourselves to being like, yeah, that person's worthy of love. I'm also worthy of that love too.
mhm,
Um, and building that self-love for yourself really means claiming ownership over your existence, embracing your multitudes, being curious to all of this, and truly having the nerve to be here as you are. And just remembering not only your fundamental rights, but really your inherent deserving of being here as a human being.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and I think that's something that's so special to all of us, right? And
mhm.
so special for each woman and worth celebrating. So,
Yeah, and being able to take the time to slow down and pay attention to those things that
yeah,
do exist underneath that inherent self-worth. Because if we don't off the bat feel that we are worthy, I
yeah,
think that piece of being able to slow down and just appreciate myself, doing something as simple as reminding myself just one good thing that I did today,
mhm,
those are going to be the helpful reminders that really can push us forward. So finding a place to feel grateful for myself. and
exactly.
and I think that foundation towards self-love, it's a big part of coming together as a community. It's
Mm,
hard to support other women, it's hard to be empathetic and compassionate with other women if we don't feel that way about ourselves. Meaning, if the criticism goes outward, it also comes inward. It's not a happy place in here. I can't create a happy place for other women out there.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of emotional work to it. And I think we discount emotional work as being work, but it is,
Mhm.
it's a lot of work. And I always go back to this thought, and I'm spiritual and a little hippy dippy. So I have this thought when it comes to really bolstering my sense of worth, is that, you know, you've never existed before. right? Like just the very basicness of that. You have never existed before. You are a unique event in the history of the entire universe. No one has ever had your particular experiences. Life has never expressed itself through you before. And that alone is an incredible, powerful, mysterious miracle in every sense. And when you really boil it down to that, you sort of like come to a realization that like, oh yeah, I have the right to live out my miraculousness, because that's the contract as a woman, a girl, gender nonconforming person, a human, and fundamentally speaking, like being a woman and being in love with your womanhood is a phenomenal force of love and the human experience. So we often forget that, and it's really important. Yeah, it's really just important to bring it down.
And it's the beautiful work of becoming ourselves.
Exactly.
And it's also a gift. And sometimes when we touch on this topic, because it does require digging deep and self-reflection on some of the harder things that we've been through, we also can lose sight of the fact that there is a gift that underlies there. It's the beautiful work of discovering who you really are, and then finding that confidence and that capacity to go out there and do the things that you want to do, to be a part of this world in the way that looks like for you.
Exactly. And even if you don't have the capacity to have the confidence for yourself, or we're often trying to push each other to optimize ourselves or to be the best version of ourselves. Even if you don't have that, just having that mercy and that understanding towards yourself, saying, I'm a woman, and being a woman means being a human now, and being neither more or less than that. And I say that because oftentimes we forget in our interactions with ourselves and others that there is that innate humanity in all of us, right? Just very like core value stuff. It doesn't have to be this, high sounding journey towards self-love, but it can just be the merit of understanding that you belong here. You deserve what everybody else deserves too. So.
Yeah, and you're speaking towards that self-pressure that's really prominent for women to constantly do more or have to achieve certain goals. And it's sort of like what you're saying is, you're good as you are. Like, just take that in.
Yeah.
You're good in who you are as a human. And you can rest in that sometimes. And especially now during the pandemic, with all of the pressure that's placed on us as women, there's definitely this feeling of, oh, I have all this time on my hands and I'm sitting at home and what should I do? And let me start writing a to-do list and this kind of thing. And it can really set us up to fail if we're not paying attention to, like what's going on internally, and are we okay just kind of being who we are, and are we feeling okay in our self-care and our sense of mental health, and just taking time to relax.
Exactly. And just to your earlier point about having this to-do list and this and what haven't I done, we live in a reality that has us seeing ourselves and each other as either commodities, as producers, makers, problems, aliens, separate from them. But so much of what will happen to us together lies in accepting the truth that we're all here together on this very and cool endeavor called life. And we're ultimately human at the end of the day. So I hope we just remember that. I know it sounds very fortune cookie-like, but I just see the interactions that we have with ourselves, and I'm just like, we don't even talk to ourselves like humans, like gentle human beings as we are. We really are gentle human beings. So yeah.
Where does all of this kind of cross over towards this year's theme for Women's Day of choosing to challenge? There's been discussions this year around the theme that have to do with challenging gender biases and really paying attention to how women are experiencing life, especially women of color, Indigenous women, someone who is also a woman and is disabled, right? Or someone who is racialized or at a disadvantage. Let's kind of switch gears and talk a little bit more about what's happening in the world today for women.
Yeah, are we talking about in the form of intersectionality?
Yeah, talk to us more about it.
Yeah,
from your
okay.
perspective.
Well, I mean, where should we begin? Like, we can even boil it down to, like, from the moment a girl is born, right? No matter where she is already met with expectations and constructed to meet unrealistic and very inordinate societal standards, right? And this continues into adulthood. I'd also like to point out that this does happen to men and boys as well, but much differently. So the cultural messages and deliberate and unconscious biases a girl faces are never ending and coming from different directions, each of them leading to consequences around personal identity, relationships, participation, confidence, education, opportunities, and so on. And this kind of overall societal thinking model has really proven to be very harmful and becomes another obstacle to meaningful living. And when I say meaningful living, I don't mean just living for the person experiencing it. I'm saying total human capacity, human capital, meaningful living. We think about, girls and women being taught by educators and family members to be obedient and ladylike and nurturing, because they themselves were probably told that these were considered to be the attributes of a good student or a good girl, right? And that these qualities are inferior. And when we continuously underline them over and over and over again, they can be incredibly problematic, right? Because a girl is subconsciously taught to measure her value by how nice, accommodating, and obedient she is, and how her only contributions to the world will be when she does something for somebody else, right? And if she wasn't doing that around the clock, she would be considered selfish. So we inextricably create these cultural constructs to really keep women in their box. And when we think about that, we also have to think about, who does that actually benefit, right? Keeping women in a certain lane and a certain box. Who does that benefit? It actually benefits the very people creating those gender constructs. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What is it like when we talk about equality and we talk about accepting women as they are, especially in their sense of diversity? How is it harder today for women of color?
I mean, I can speak from my personal experiences, but I grew up in Rexdale, which is known to be a densely populated neighborhood, predominantly Black, brown, and immigrant populations, and one which was often referred to as the ghetto in Toronto. And, some people use the term in a very disruptive way, but many times when someone said ghetto, they meant it in a very pejorative sense, a sense that often often lends itself to race, socioeconomic standing, cultural attitudes, or just like a rundown poor area. So for me, as a woman of color, I often heard from outside groups, oh yeah, Char's from a ghetto, or Char goes to that ghetto school. It's really dangerous. And this very, very benign example of using this language would often leave me feeling inferior and negatively classified, because I associated myself with how people saw and used that term. And at times, it felt that society always had a means of perceiving you or categorizing you, especially if you're a woman of color. So assigning biases about people based on where they live or the color of their skin, you can imagine all of the ways people of color are met and treated, or the despicable things that are said by folks outside of those areas, or how people like me living in those neighborhoods are generally limited based on these intermeshing distinctions and more. So, we have to talk about how this can hold a woman of color back in many aspects of her life, right? So if you grew up in an area like Rexdale, there's sort of this default way of existing in that you have way more systemic hurdles and structural adversities to overcome because of where you live, how much money you make, and what the color of your skin meant you deserved. And it's more than about it being about identity politics. Because I don't know if you hear this, but I often hear people talking about intersectionality as, oh, it's like totally identity politics. And really, it's about the realities and experiences of people that are used against them instead of being used to carve out equitable solutions for everybody. So I think about that and how the fight for true equality really should include the admission of all experiences as it relates to inequality and privilege. And, a great place to start is by using that intersectional framework that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is to actually understand like what those limits then look like in society for those girls and those women,
Yeah.
to create that change on a society level, right? Or on an institutional level or on a structural level, because those barriers are then constant.
Exactly.
And we've seen it with the pandemic that women are at a greater disadvantage, right? Because access to resources that they need are potentially no longer available, or they're placed in caregiver positions where maybe they need to work and they can't, or if they're in a position where they're a woman and their socioeconomic status is also lower and they're struggling financially. Maybe they're in a job that doesn't have sick leave. Maybe they can't take work off if they're worried about how they feel, right?
Exactly.
And so there's all of these kind of then layers that go into trying to figure out, well, how do we create that change? And so I like that you're talking about learning and paying attention and learning about it more deeply to then understand where that change needs to kind of start at that level.
Exactly. I mean, just to what you were saying earlier, the job of intersectionality is really to make sure that those very real compounding identities are A, considered, B, recognized, and for me, most importantly, applied to the work that interrogates those systems, right? Who use identity to exclude and assign power. Because we all know the experiences of a youth non-binary person of color who identifies as a Muslim is going to be very different from, say, a white woman living in a rural area, predominantly Christian, right? And neither one of those is bad or good. It's just a means of applying that lens so that when we are talking about challenges and solutions around equality, public health, homelessness, parity, education, all those other things that affect us, we can say, oh, no one gets left behind, right? We can actually create long-term inclusive solutions and avoid feeding this engine of institutions that keeps so many Black and brown people poor, underserved, and vulnerable to marginalization in the first place. And, I have hope, and I hope we get to a place where the denial of differences is in the past, and instead the color wheel of experiences is really just celebrated and uplifted.
What's something that you would provide to our listeners as a kind of piece of action? Because we're talking a lot about more of these things at a society level, and how does one person then go forward and work towards kind of eliminating those biases that exist within our society? What are the things that people do at an individual level to do that?
I mean, to recognize that we all have biases is the first start. I often hear some people saying, oh, I don't have any biases, right? Even from people of color. And I've said it myself too, is recognizing, biases are so ingrained in our society, and no one's really exempt from that sort of thinking because we've just sort of been beat to know these biases. But starting there is recognizing, oh, you know what, I may have some not bettering, but I may have some reckoning to do with my own personal biases, right? And really focusing there instead of finding somebody else that has larger biases and then focusing on them and say, well, you know what, you're racist because of this, or you're sexist or this, is really bringing it back to how can I address mine first before I'm able to really correct and challenge someone else's. And this isn't to say that we should only focus on individual action. This is just to say that it starts here, and then we're able to build a community around us that's also doing the same kind of work. And then obviously interrogating the larger system at play. So,
and I really
sorry, go ahead.
No, I really like that starting point of self-reflection.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's easy, right? It's easy. It's free. Um, you don't need to buy all these books to learn about. I mean, it helps, but I'm saying just having that personal admission to say, look, I am part of this system that perpetuates these biases and harmful adverse stereotypes. I need to understand where I need to work on. And from there, I'm able to have much stronger, more robust conversations with other people. And I'm not just going into these conversations just blaming other people for their inherent biases, right?
And I do really believe that that is going to be a huge part of the change that we have momentum for this year, because I think that we are starting to understand that we have to look inward as a starting point. We have to pay attention to our own biases. We have to recognize who we are as a part of that picture. And I think that is something that is starting to be discussed and people are starting to connect with is, okay, what am I doing here? Or what have I done in my history? And how can I change my language? And how can I change my actions? That's how we change the climate. That's how we change the societal climate, is person by person. It takes one person, right? It takes one person in that community, or it takes one person in your social circle or your workplace to have that ripple effect for change. And I truly believe that I completely agree with you. And that self-reflection piece is so important.
Exactly. Yeah. And having that starting from that individual standpoint, you're able to really ground yourself in as to what you're actually trying to stand for, right? I definitely don't believe that self-reflection is the only way and should be the sole way of doing these things, but it helps, right? You have that self-reflection, you're able to learn all the things that you're able to unlearn the things that you've been learning over the years, and then you're able to apply it into your everyday decisions, right? And then also connect with other people to do the same as well. So it shouldn't just end at you, at self-reflection. That self-reflection should be applied.
Into
right?
action.
Yeah, into action, exactly. And like I said earlier, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't hold other people accountable. Like, it doesn't mean that you can just go, you know what, I'm only focusing on myself. Everybody else can just go do what they have to do. It means that we're all part of this together, and that the learning is something that includes all of us.
Yeah. So your Good to Be Good Foundation was highlighting today how men play a role in this movement towards gender equality. As we're talking about that as this year's theme, share with us a bit more about how are men, a part of the picture as we talk about women's equality.
Yeah, thank you so much for commenting on that. We were so excited to release it. But yeah, in the public imagination, I think there still seems to be resistance to the idea of men being considered feminists. I've experienced it. I've heard male identified friends say it. They say stuff like, oh, Char, I believe in equality, but I'm not a feminist per se. Or I know that women and girls should be treated fairly, but what about men? Right? And we have to remember that the world is not a binary operation. Equality does not mean women are up here and men are down there. It just means equal footing, but this equal footing really requires that co-equal participation, excuse me. So, I hear men say that they don't know where to enter in the dialogue when it comes to women's issues. So they just end up staying silent out of intimidation or uncertainty. So we really need to dismantle this thinking that says that women, men, and gender diverse people cannot work together. We have to start there. We have to get away from this idea that women only care about women and that white men only care about white men, or that people of color only care about people of color, which is not true. And, even using languages like women's themes or women's causes is really often misconstrued to be issues that singularly affect and concern women and girls. So, and inevitably that distances 50% of the population from the conversation, especially from conversations about gender-based violence, which are, funnily enough, like not funnily enough, but which are ironically enough, primarily about them and their relationships to attitudes around masculinity. So why are we not including them in the first place, right? So really, when we talk about gender equality, I think the common idea is that it is not a woman's fight, but it's actually a people's fight for women. And we need to start understanding how the concerns of women and girls are tied to other agendas like social development and human capacity and human flourishing. And we should really start seeing each other as partners in life. And I think that's really important. And we can start by doing this by engaging men and boys from all backgrounds, encouraging them to acknowledge their own biases, and encouraging them to acknowledge the issues around gender equality. You know, we can also empower male and non-binary bystanders and really help them, enable them to break free from these long-standing social norms and beliefs. So I think starting from there as well, we'll be able to build back stronger when we include men, right? And when we include men, it's including men, with women, and alongside women, not behind or not in front.
Yeah, I like that. Makes a lot of sense. The video was great because it just showed so many different kind of attitudes or perspectives, and so I encourage everyone to go take a look, and it does create that important lens to help us understand where kind of men can take part and where men can participate.
Yeah, we've all heard it, right? We have that one guy friend that says something so ridiculous like, you know, oh, this isn't for me, right? This is for women who burn bras and that sort of thing. Like, people actually still believe that. And it's crazy because feminism is not the F word, it's a good F word. And we have to start believing that feminism supports all of us, right? And that our global connection cannot exist without feminism, and that includes men as well. So I really challenge and urge everyone to have these conversations with the men in their life, and especially the young boys in their life, and really think about how we're shaping these young boys to challenge the gender norms that maybe the older men we sort of lost them. Not lost them, but a little hard to engage.
Yeah, it brings us back to that idea of shaping teams, right? And how critical it is, especially when we're talking about this part of the picture, to be able to help change the way that we socialize boys, and that's going to be good for them, and that's going to be good for women.
Exactly. Yeah. And then with that, we can actually put a stop to these long-standing social issues and not perpetuate them even more, because we've, nipped it at the butt. We've prevented it, right? But it is really important that we, like, and I said this earlier, but it's really, really, really important that we see each other as partners in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People for people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Char, what closing thoughts do you have for us today? We'll leave a little bit of time in case there's any questions in the chat. And so if anybody has questions that you want to ask to Char and I, you're welcome to add them into the chat right now. And what would you like to say to us in your closing words, Char?
I'd love to leave you guys with just my thought on gender equality, and what's so great about the space and the movement of gender equality is that we all have a part in coexisting and sharing in the creation of solutions. So we can look around us and see the different means someone might contribute to positive change, but remember that this isn't the effort of one or two women doing it at 100%. It's a shared responsibility, and the actions of every person matter and carry weight. And I just want everyone to remember that. So, when you remember that you're also part of this change, I hope it incites you to actually act on it, and that we're not leaving it to just one group of or type of people, that that you can actually do that work yourself. And I love this saying too, that there are no chosen women, only women who choose. So know that when you choose to challenge gender equality, that you're choosing to invest in yourself and others and women, and that you're choosing to live in a world with possibilities that leave no one behind.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, you're really speaking to that sense of coming together and that sense of connection, which we have seen this year is so fundamental to us. You know, we don't do well on our own. And it's a call for us through this pandemic to recognize the importance of community and the importance of connectedness and togetherness, and how much better we are in these causes that are important to us when we do come together, and we all do kind of make that piece to improve that sense of connectedness. Like I mean, I can say as well, like when I think about the fact that, you know, now in our lives there's this great sense of isolation. There's lots of things that I think about. Oh, I wish I had done this last year, or I wish I had connected with this person, or I wish I had, you know, went to that event, or this kind of thing. I think there's definitely a climate in the air right now of let's do it, because now we realize how precious it is.
Exactly.
We realize how precious it is to come together.
Exactly. Yeah. I learned this very special philosophy in South Africa. I actually wear it on my neck. And the Zulu word is Ubuntu, Ubuntu. And it's such a beautiful philosophy and concept. It means I am because you are. You know, there exists a common bond between all of us. And you know, through this bond and our interactions with one another, we can find our own human qualities. And we declare our own humanity when we acknowledge the entirety of it for others as well. So just speaking to what you were saying about togetherness and interconnectedness, it's really that start of seeing each other for who we are and how our destinies are so deeply connected and intertwined with one another. So I think with that philosophy, it makes it not only easier but more fulfilling to interact with one another, and also to interact in these issues that affect all of us. So just remember
Absolutely.
that Ubuntu, it's beautiful.
Ubuntu.
Yeah.
I love it, Char. Okay, Char, I think that's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Really hearing about your own lived experiences, and, you know, sharing with us in terms of how we can kind of self-reflect and then also come together as a community. I think that's really what I take from our talk today. And so thank you so much for sitting with us and spending your time with us. And thank you to everybody for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Okay. So that wraps up our day and our speaker series for the I Love Me campaign. And if you want to get in touch with Char, do you want to let everybody know how to get more involved with Good to Be Good?
Yes, please visit our Instagram. It's at Good to Be Good Foundation, or you can visit us at goodtobegood.ca. I was going to say www, but it's kind of useless. Goodtobegood.ca. Yeah.
Okay,
and then
wonderful.
From there, thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you. And if you want to get in touch with the I Love Me campaign, send us an email at hello@ilmcampaign.com or visit www.ilmcampaign.com. And we're also fundraising today for Women's Day so that we can continue to make these educational events free of cost for our participants. So if you do want to donate, just go to the website. And again, we thank everybody today for joining us as we finish up and wrap up with the lovely Char.
And congratulations, 5 years. Yay.
Thank you. Thanks, Char. Okay, bye, everybody. Have a great night.
Take care.